Did you say you wanted to learn how to code? Has coding irritated your soul? Or have you just given up on coding altogether? My name's Gabriel, and I'll be helping you out on your coding journey. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So these are the various topics that I'm going to go over today in this tutorial. So every time you start a program in Visual Studios, it's always going to look like this. You have your library, you have your namespace, classes, and the main method. I'm not going to go into big detail about that now because I just want you to focus on the basic stuff, just the basic. Just know that this is how it looks like in the beginning. So let me start off with comments. So there are two key comments that you can write when you're coding. You have single line comments and multi-line comments. A single line comment is pretty self-explanatory. It's only on one single line versus a multi-line comment. You can write it on multiple lines. Just follow the structure and then you'll be good to go when you're writing your comments. Another thing that I want to go over is the difference of these data types. So when you're coding, it's important to know different data types. Now, an int is a number without a decimal point, is like my best way of explaining to you it. It's like a 1, 2, 55, etc. A double, on the other hand, is a number with a decimal point. So those are your 23.2, your 2.0, etc. You know, I don't need to go into too much detail. Now, there's also a bool. A bool is like a Boolean. So basically, it's either true or false. That's pretty much it for a Boolean. Then you can have string. What a string is like a group of characters. So traditionally in programming, whenever you have your first program, it's hello world. So these are basically a group of characters that are written as a string. So you can write it out as 1 plus 2. That would come out as like a string, you know. So those are examples of string. The last one I'm going to go over today is a char. A char is a single letter. So notice how string is like you can write a group of characters. A char is only one like character. So that's the difference between a char and a string. So those are just basic data types that I feel like would be best for you to know at this time. Again, there are many more out there, but I don't want to go into too much detail. I don't want to overwhelm you. Okay, now let's move on to different statements. So there can be various statements out there, and these are just me showing you how you can use each data type to make in a statement. So a statement is like a sentence in English or in general, but instead of ending a sentence with a period, you end it with a semicolon. So here is basically the format when you're making a statement. These are all examples of like initializing a variable. So you basically create a variable such as age, ounces, status, name, or grade, but you want to also identify what type of variable that's going to be. Now, I wanted age to be an integer, so I identified it as an integer. I chose the data type, I said the variable name, and then I assigned it to a value. Now age is always going to be 14 unless I later on change the value and reassign age to a new value. Same with the double. I made ounces a double data type and I assigned it to the value of 23.4. Boolean is status. The status is the Boolean data type and I'm assigning it to the value of true, and so on and so on. So I think you get the point from here, and I'm gonna move on. So you can also, when you're coding, you can add, you can subtract, you can multiply, you can divide, and you can use this term called a modulus. I'm gonna go over everything real quickly, so don't be worried. So basically what I did here is I initialized A, B, and C as integers. Now you may be wondering, oh, I don't need to assign it a value right ahead. Yes, you don't have to assign it a value right ahead, but you want to get in the habit of assigning it ahead of time versus kind of like how I did it. But this is just to show you that you can do it like this. So here I made I assigned A 0, B 2, and C 3. Keep in mind that all these variables are integers. So what I did here was I did A equals B plus C. So what this statement says is that A is going to be assigned the value of what B plus C is. Now, remember that we made B2 and C3. So A will become 2 plus 3, which means that A will become 5. And if A is 5, here we're saying A is assigned B minus C. Remember, we still have B and C up here because we didn't update B or C. So it's going to be 2 minus 3. But keep in mind that A is no longer 0 because A became 5. So 5 is no longer the value anymore because we're assigning it the value of B minus C. So basically 2 minus 3, negative 1. So I think you get the memo from here on. You can do it with multiplication and division. Keep in mind that because we made it an integer, that ints don't carry a decimal value. So when you divide B divided by C, 2 divided by 3, we all know that that's 0 because 2 can't divide by 3. But if it were to be a double, it would have that decimal answer in it. It would calculate it. So that's just something to keep in mind. Another thing that I think is important to elaborate on is what a modulus is. Basically, it's you in this statement, you're saying A is assigned to C modulus B. So what this is saying is you're taking C divided by B, and that's 3 divided by 2. But the difference between a modulus and a division is that a modulus only focuses on the remainder part that's left over. So basically, we all know that 3 divided by 2, you'll have one remainder left over. So A will become 1 because we're only caring about the remainder value part in this case. So, these are just examples of operations. I don't want to overwhelm you. So, if you want to play around with it later on, by all means, play around. I'm going to move on to the last part in the video. So here are strings. Strings, like I said, a group of characters. Here, I made a first name variable and a last name variable. And you can write strings and print them out onto the computer. So here I said console.WriteLine. So what I'm telling is basically telling the computer to write this. First name, which is already stored as Daniel, plus, notice how I put a space. If I were to just put first name plus last name, it wouldn't have that space in between. That's why I added a space. But you'll learn that when you play around with it later on. But this will basically print out Daniel space Carter. Another example would be the console.readLine. Here, I created a string called input. I didn't give it a value. I didn't initialize it. So, but that's okay because later on I made input and I assigned input a value, console.readLine. What that means is that it's going to read whatever input the user enters. Keep in mind that it's going to be looking for a string, so it's going to make input whatever the user types in. So these are just some basic examples to get you started. I didn't want to overwhelm you in the first video. Another thing that I think is important to keep in mind is that the computer only does what you tell it to do. Don't get frustrated at the computer because things aren't working well. Because in reality, the computer is only doing what you specifically are telling it to do. So don't get too frustrated, just practice. Another thing I would say is to really understand your code. Now, you could go and copy people's code and just get it out of the way, but in the long run, that's only going to hurt you. You really want to understand what you're trying to do, because then that's how you're going to grow. And I would love for you to grow. It's important. The third thing I would say is that coding is a list of directions that the computer follows. Keep in mind that the computer is only reading things step by step by step. Basically, think of it as making a peanut butter jelly sandwich. You have to tell somebody to follow each step in order to make the peanut butter jelly sandwich. You know, the peanut butter on one side, jelly on the other side, and then bam, you got your peanut butter jelly sandwich. But if you leave out any details, it could come out completely different than what you intended. That's why it's a good thing to keep in mind that the computer only follows directions that you write out step by step by step. Another thing that I think is important is to make good variable names. You want to make names that make sense, because if you make goofy names, you won't understand it later down on the road. Another tip that I'll recommend is to make comments throughout your code. You want to make your code so that another person can understand it. You don't want another person guessing at what you were thinking. You want them to understand exactly what you're talking about, or even if you wanted to come back to the code, you want to understand what you were thinking in that moment in time. I think an important thing to keep in mind is to wonder like what you're trying to achieve. What are your goals? I think if you go into programming, I'm guilty of this, go into strict programming and don't plan out what you're trying to do, it will make it difficult to code in the long run. So I would recommend planning out your code before you start. I'd recommend also practice coding often, because you're only going to get as good as you practice. If you never really practice, it's going to seem difficult. But once you practice more often, it'll get better. Run your own race. Make sure that you focus on yourself. Don't worry about the person next to you's movement in learning this information. Coding is definitely a lot to learn and to take on. It's like learning a new language, they say. So don't worry about others. Just focus on your self-growth and you got it. Don't be afraid to ask for help. I was worried about asking for help in my past because I felt like I was going to come out sounding silly. That's nonsense. You should ask for help because that is important on your development and growth. And then the last thing that I'll leave with you today is just be patient with yourself. This isn't a sprint. Think of it as more of a marathon. You want to develop and grow as you go on and get better techniques as you go on. Okay, I know this video was quick, but I just wanted to wrap it up. Thank you so much for tuning into the video. Let me know in the comments down below what you think and anything that you would like to see in the next video. Okay, thank you.